The dust from the freight train's wheels billowed into Jolene Reed's face as she wedged herself deeper between two wooden crates marked Mining Equipment Denver. Her heart hammering so hard she feared the conductor might hear it 3 cars away. It was the summer of 1883, and the 21-year-old woman had just stolen aboard the westbound Southern Pacific in the dead of night, fleeing from a forced marriage to a cattle baron twice her age back in Amarillo, Texas. Her father had sold her like livestock, and she had 48 hours before they would discover she had vanished from her locked bedroom, the window left swinging open in the hot wind. The train lurched forward with a screech of metal against metal, and Jolene pressed her hands against the rough wood to keep from tumbling out of her hiding spot. She wore men's trousers and a loose shirt she had stolen from the laundry line, her long auburn hair tucked up under a worn hat. Everything she owned in this world was in the small canvas bag pressed against her ribs. Her mother's silver locket, $17 she had saved over 2 years from selling eggs without her father's knowledge, and a letter her mother had written before dying of consumption when Jolene was 15, telling her to always follow her heart. The rhythmic clacking of the wheels against the tracks became almost hypnotic as the hours passed. Jolene dozed fitfully, jerking awake each time the train slowed or the whistle blew. By the time dawn painted the sky in streaks of pink and gold, her entire body ached from the cramped position. She could hear men's voices as the train pulled into a station, and she made herself as small as possible, barely breathing. "Check those crates before we head out," someone shouted. "We got reports of drifters hopping the freight." Footsteps approached her car, heavy boots against the wooden floor. Jolene's pulse thundered in her ears. She closed her eyes, praying to a god she wasn't sure was listening. "This one looks secure enough," a different voice said, so close she could have reached out and touched the speaker's boot. "Let's check the next car." The footsteps retreated, and Jolene allowed herself a shaky breath. The train remained at the station for what felt like an eternity, and she heard the sounds of cargo being loaded and unloaded, men arguing about schedules and shipments. Her stomach growled painfully, reminding her that she had not eaten since the previous afternoon, but she did not dare move to retrieve the dried beef and hardtack in her bag. Finally, the train lurched into motion again, picking up speed as it left the station behind. Jolene shifted slightly, trying to restore feeling to her left leg, which had gone completely numb. Through a gap in the crates, she could see the landscape changing, the flat Texas plains gradually giving way to rougher terrain as they headed west into New Mexico territory. The heat was oppressive, made worse by the enclosed space and the lack of air circulation. Sweat trickled down Jolene's spine, and she used her sleeve to wipe her face. She thought about the cool creek behind her childhood home, the one place where she had felt free, wading in the shallow water and watching the minnows dart between the rocks. That girl seemed like someone else now, someone who had not yet learned what cruelty men could inflict in the name of business arrangements and family honor. The train traveled for 2 more days, stopping at various stations along the route. Jolene learned to recognize the patterns, the way the whistle would blow 3 times before they pulled into a station, the sounds of the brakes engaging. She rationed her food carefully, knowing she could not risk being discovered, and drank sparingly from her canteen. At night, when the train stopped at sidings to allow other trains to pass, she would slip out of her hiding place just long enough to relieve herself behind the car, her legs shaking from disuse. On the 3rd morning, the train began to climb into mountains, the air growing thinner and cooler. Jolene peered through the gap in the crates and saw pine trees covering the slopes, so different from the mesquite and scrub brush of Texas. The train labored up steep grades, the engine straining, and then flew down the other side with a speed that made her stomach drop. They reached California on the fourth day, and Jolene knew it because she heard the conductor shouting about San Pedro and the Pacific Ocean. Her heart leaped at the words. California. The very edge of the country, as far from Texas as she could possibly get without boarding a ship. The train began to slow, the brakes squealing, and Jolene prepared herself to move quickly once they stopped. But something went wrong. She heard shouting, urgent and alarmed, and then the train jerked violently to one side. The crates around her shifted and one of them toppled, pinning her left arm against the floor. Jolene bit back a scream as pain shot through her shoulder. The train came to a shuddering halt, and she could hear men running, voices raised in panic. The bridge is out ahead. Someone cut the support cables. Check for damage to the train. Jolene struggled to free her arm, but the crate was too heavy. She could feel warm blood trickling down from where the rough wood had torn her skin. Footsteps approached, multiple sets, and she knew she was about to be discovered. There was nothing she could do. The crate was suddenly lifted away, and Jolene found herself staring up at three men. The first was the conductor, his face red and sweating beneath his cap. The second was a railroad worker in dusty overalls. The third was a cowboy, tall and lean, with dark hair visible beneath his wide-brimmed hat and eyes the color of storm clouds. He was the one who had lifted the crate as if it weighed nothing, his muscular arms still extended. "Well, I'll be," the conductor said, his eyes widening as he took in Jolene's appearance. "It's a girl. She's hurt," the cowboy said, his voice deep and calm. He knelt beside Jolene, his hands gentle as he examined her arm. "This needs cleaning and bandaging. The cut's not too deep, but it'll get infected if we leave it." "She's a stowaway," the conductor sputtered. "She needs to be arrested, and she needs medical attention," the cowboy interrupted, his gray eyes lifting to meet the conductor's with an intensity that made the older man take a step back. "Everything else can wait." The railroad worker peered at Jolene with curiosity. "How long you been hiding in there, miss?" "4 days," Jolene said, her voice hoarse from disuse. "I got on in Texas." The conductor's face turned even redder. 4 days. You rode 4 days hidden between those crates in this heat." The cowboy was still looking at Jolene, and there was something in his expression she could not quite identify. Respect, perhaps, or admiration. "You're braver than any man here," he said quietly. "Most couldn't last 4 hours in that heat, let alone 4 days." Something stirred in Jolene's chest at his words, at the way he spoke to her, as if she were an equal rather than a criminal or a piece of property. She met his gaze and saw no judgment there, only a calm assessment and what might have been the beginning of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "Can you stand?" he asked. Jolene nodded, though she was not entirely certain. The cowboy stood and offered her his hand, his grip firm and steady as he helped her to her feet. Her legs trembled, weak from days of disuse, and he kept his hand on her elbow to steady her. "I'm Tobias Lawson," he said. "Most people call me Toby." "Jolene Reed," she replied, then wondered if she should have given a false name. But something about Tobias made her want to be honest, to not hide behind lies. The conductor had recovered some of his bluster. "Miss Reed, you're under arrest for theft of services from the Southern Pacific Railroad. You'll be held in San Pedro until—" "Now hold on," Tobias said, his voice taking on an edge. "The bridge is out, which means someone's trying to rob this train or worse. You really want to worry about a scared girl who was just trying to get somewhere safe. The rules can wait until we deal with whoever cut those cables," Tobias said firmly. "Right now, we need to get everyone to safety and figure out what's going on." As if to emphasize his point, a shot rang out, the bullet pinging off the metal roof of the freight car. All four of them dropped to the floor instinctively. "Bandits," the railroad worker shouted. "I knew this was a holdup." More shots followed, and Jolene could hear horses approaching, the thunder of hooves on hard, packed earth. Her heart raced, but oddly, she felt less afraid than she had sitting in her father's parlor, listening to him and the cattle baron discuss her bride price. At least here the danger was honest, not dressed up in polite words and social conventions. Tobias had drawn his revolver, a well-maintained Colt that looked like it had seen plenty of use. "Stay down," he told Jolene. "Don't move unless I tell you to." The conductor and the railroad worker had scrambled toward the engine, leaving Jolene and Tobias alone in the freight car. Outside, men were shouting, and someone was demanding the strongbox be handed over. The train robbery was in full swing. Tobias moved to the edge of the car, peering out carefully. "6 of them," he murmured. "Maybe 7. They're at the engine car now." "What are you going to do?" Jolene asked. He glanced back at her. "I'm a deputy marshal traveling to San Pedro on assignment, so I suppose I'm going to do my job." "Against 7 men. Sometimes the odds aren't in your favor," he said with a slight smile. "You just have to do what needs doing anyway." Before Jolene could respond, he had swung down from the car, using the crates and shadows as cover. She watched him move with practiced ease, his boots barely making a sound on the rocky ground. Everything in her screamed to stay hidden, to keep her head down, but something stronger pushed back against the fear. Tobias was 1 man against 7, and he had been kind to her when he could have simply turned her over to the conductor. Jolene grabbed a piece of splintered wood from the broken crate and crept to the edge of the car. She could see the bandits now, a rough group of men with bandanas covering their faces, their guns trained on the conductor and the railroad workers they had rounded up. Tobias was moving along the far side of the train, staying out of sight. One of the bandits, a stocky man with a scar visible even above his bandana, was shouting at the conductor. "The strongbox! Open it now, or I start shooting passengers." "There are no passengers," the conductor said, his voice shaking. "This is a freight train. Don't lie to me, old man. We know there's payroll on this train, headed to the mines in San Pedro. Now open that box." Tobias had worked his way to a position behind a large boulder, about 20 feet from where the bandits had gathered. Jolene saw him check his revolver, saw the set of his jaw as he prepared to make his move. 6 shots in the gun against 7 men. The mathematics were not encouraging. She looked around desperately, searching for something, anything that might help. Her gaze fell on a lantern hanging from a hook inside the freight car, the kind used for signaling. An idea formed, reckless and probably stupid, but she was already moving before she could talk herself out of it. Jolene grabbed the lantern and the matches beside it. She struck a match and lit the wick, then looked around for something flammable. The crates of mining equipment would not burn quickly enough, but there was a barrel marked pitch in the corner. She pried off the lid and found it half full of the black, sticky substance. Perfect. Working quickly, she soaked a piece of cloth in the pitch and wrapped it around another piece of wood. When she lit it, the makeshift torch blazed to life, black smoke pouring from it. Jolene took a deep breath, said a quick prayer, and threw the torch as hard as she could toward the far side of the clearing, away from both Tobias and the bandits. The torch landed in a patch of dry grass, and flames immediately began to spread. The bandits whirled toward the new threat, their attention divided. That was all Tobias needed. He stepped out from behind the boulder, his voice ringing with authority. "United States Marshal, drop your weapons for a moment." Everything seemed frozen. Then 2 of the bandits made the mistake of going for their guns. Tobias fired twice, and both men went down, clutching their legs. He had deliberately aimed to wound rather than kill, Jolene realized. The other bandits scattered, firing wildly as they ran for their horses. But the leader, the scarred man, grabbed the conductor and put a gun to his head. "You take one more step, Marshal, and I'll paint the ground with his brains." Tobias stopped, his gun still trained on the bandit. "You're surrounded," he said calmly. "Let him go and you might live through this." The bandit laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Surrounded? I count one of you and 5 of us still standing. Those aren't the odds for surrender." Jolene's fingers tightened on the piece of wood she still held. She had created the distraction, but now she needed to do more. The bandit leader had his back partially to her, focused on Tobias and the spreading fire. If she could just get close enough. She slipped out of the freight car as quietly as possible, staying low, using the smoke from the grass fire as cover. Her legs still felt weak and unsteady, but adrenaline pushed her forward. The bandit was only a few yards away now, still holding the conductor as a shield. Tobias saw her moving, and she watched his eyes widen slightly, saw the almost imperceptible shake of his head warning her back. But Jolene kept going. She had not ridden 4 days hidden between crates just to watch a good man die. When she was close enough, she raised the piece of wood and brought it down hard on the bandit's gun hand. He howled in pain, and the gun fell to the ground. The conductor twisted away, and Tobias fired, his bullet catching the bandit in the shoulder and spinning him around. The other bandits, seeing their leader fall, broke and ran. Tobias let them go, instead rushing to secure the wounded leader and check on Jolene. "Are you insane?" he demanded, but there was no real anger in his voice, only concern. "He could have killed you." "He was going to kill you," Jolene replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Or the conductor. I couldn't just hide." Tobias stared at her for a long moment, and Jolene saw something change in his expression, a deepening of the respect she had glimpsed earlier. "You're something else, Jolene Reed," he said finally. The conductor was checking on the wounded bandits, and the railroad workers were scrambling to put out the grass fire before it spread further. In all the chaos, no one seemed to remember that Jolene was supposed to be under arrest. Tobias helped her sit down on a large rock, his hands gentle as he examined the cut on her arm. "We still need to clean this," he said. "Do you have anything in that bag of yours?" Jolene handed him her canteen, and he poured water over the wound, washing away the blood and dirt. She hissed at the sting but did not pull away. His fingers were surprisingly gentle for a man who had just shot 2 people. "This is going to need stitches," he said, examining the wound more closely. "We're only about 5 miles from San Pedro. Once the railroad company sends help for the bridge, we can get you to a doctor." "And then to jail?" Jolene asked quietly. Tobias met her eyes. "Tell me why you were running." So Jolene told him, the words spilling out in a rush. She told him about her father's debts, about the cattle baron who wanted a pretty young wife to show off, about the locked bedroom and the open window. She told him about her mother's letter and the desperate hope that somewhere, somehow, she could make a life on her own terms. Tobias listened without interrupting, his gray eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Your father sold you," he said finally, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Like property." "That's the law, isn't it?" Jolene said bitterly. "A woman belongs to her father until she belongs to her husband." "The law is wrong about a lot of things," Tobias said, "and I'm not about to send a brave woman back to a life she doesn't want." Jolene's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that as far as I'm concerned, you helped stop a train robbery. You saved the conductor's life and probably mine too. That earns you a pardon for any minor infractions like riding a freight train." He stood, offering her his hand again. "Welcome to California, Miss Reed." The relief that flooded through Jolene was so intense it made her dizzy. She took Tobias's hand and stood, swaying slightly. He steadied her, his hand warm and solid on her waist. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," he said with a slight smile. "San Pedro is a rough town. The silver mines bring in all kinds of people, not all of them friendly. You'll need a place to stay and a way to earn money." "I can work," Jolene said quickly. "I'm not afraid of hard work. I can cook, clean, so I helped manage my father's household after my mother died." Tobias nodded thoughtfully. "There's a woman in San Pedro runs a boarding house, widow named Mrs. Chen. She's fair and honest and she could probably use help. I can introduce you if you'd like." "I'd like that very much," Jolene said. They spent the next few hours helping secure the wounded bandits and waiting for help to arrive from San Pedro. True to his word, Tobias made sure everyone understood that Jolene had been instrumental in stopping the robbery. The conductor grumbled, but did not pursue the matter of her stowaway status, especially after Jolene pointed out that if she had not been on the train, the bandits might have succeeded. By late afternoon, a crew arrived from town to assess the damage to the bridge and transport the prisoners. Tobias helped Jolene into the back of a wagon, and they rode together into San Pedro as the sun began to sink toward the Pacific Ocean. San Pedro was larger than Jolene had expected, a bustling town that had grown up around the harbor and the nearby silver mines. The main street was lined with buildings in various states of construction and decay, from freshly painted storefronts to weather-beaten saloons. Men of every description crowded the wooden sidewalks, miners still dirty from their shifts, sailors from the ships in the harbor, businessmen in suits that looked out of place in the dusty town, and cowboys like Tobias, lean and hard from lives lived outdoors. The wagon stopped in front of a neat two-story building with a sign that read Chen's Boarding House Clean Rooms, Fair Prices. A woman emerged as they climbed down, her black hair streaked with gray and pulled back in a practical bun. She wore a simple dress and an apron, and her dark eyes were sharp and assessing. "Marshall Lawson," she said, her English flavored with a Chinese accent. "You bring me trouble or business?" "Hopefully business, Mrs. Chen," Tobias replied with a respectful nod. "This is Miss Jolene Reed. She's new to San Pedro and looking for work. I thought you might have something for her." Mrs. Chen studied Jolene with the same thoroughness she might use to examine a piece of fabric for flaws. Jolene forced herself to stand straight despite her exhaustion, meeting the older woman's gaze steadily. "You know how to work hard?" Mrs. Chen asked. "Yes, madam," Jolene said. "You run from something or someone." Jolene hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Someone, an arranged marriage I didn't want." Mrs. Chen's expression softened slightly. "This I understand. My family want me to marry rich merchant in San Francisco. I marry ship carpenter instead, poor but kind man. We come here, build this place together." She gestured to the boarding house. "He died 5 years ago, but I keep his dream alive." "I'm very sorry for your loss," Jolene said quietly. Mrs. Chen nodded. "Life is hard for women alone. We help each other, yes." She turned to Tobias. "She helped stop train robbery, you say?" "She did more than help," Tobias said. "She saved lives. Then she is brave and clever. These are good qualities." Mrs. Chen beckoned to Jolene. "Come inside. I show you room, explain work. You work hard, you have home here." Jolene felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them back. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. I won't disappoint you." "I know this," Mrs. Chen said matter-of-factly. "Marshall Lawson not bring me lazy girl. He has good judgment of character." There was a knowing look in her eyes as she glanced between Jolene and Tobias that made Jolene's cheeks warm. Tobias cleared his throat. "I should let you get settled, but first, let's get that arm properly treated." He turned to Mrs. Chen. "Is Doc Morrison still around?" "Yes, yes, 2 streets over, same place," Mrs. Chen said, making shooing motions with her hands. "You take her. I will prepare room." The doctor's office was a small, tidy building that smelled of carbolic acid and herbs. Dr. Morrison turned out to be a grizzled man in his 60s with gentle hands and a no-nonsense manner. He cleaned Jolene's wound thoroughly, making her wince, and put in 6 neat stitches while Tobias held her other hand. "Keep it clean and dry," Morrison instructed. "Come back in a week so I can check on it. If you see any redness or swelling, come immediately." Jolene nodded, trying not to think about how she would pay for his services. As if reading her mind, Tobias said, "Put it on my account, Doc." "I can't let you," Jolene started to protest. "You saved my life today," Tobias interrupted. "It's the least I can do." Morrison glanced between them with the same knowing look Mrs. Chen had worn. "Young love," he muttered, making a notation in his ledger. "Always the same. You'll be married within 6 months, mark my words." "We're not," Jolene began, her face flaming. "We just met," Tobias said at the same time, though Jolene noticed his ears had turned slightly red. Morrison just chuckled. "Hum. That's what they all say. Next." They walked back to the boarding house in the golden light of early evening, Jolene very aware of Tobias walking beside her. She had never felt quite like this before, this strange mixture of nervousness and excitement, of wanting to keep talking to him and being afraid of saying something foolish. "Thank you," she said finally, "for everything. For not arresting me, for getting me the job for the doctor. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Tobias stopped walking and turned to face her. "Jolene, you don't owe me anything. I did what any decent person would do." "That's not true, and you know it," Jolene said. "Most men would have turned me over to the conductor without a second thought. You saw me as a person, not just a problem to be solved." Something flickered in Tobias's eyes, something warm and intense that made Jolene's heart skip. "I saw a woman brave enough to ride 4 days hidden between crates in the heat, determined enough to risk everything for freedom," he said quietly. "How could I not help someone like that?" They stood there for a moment, the air between them charged with something Jolene could not quite name. Then Tobias cleared his throat and stepped back, breaking the spell. "I should let you rest," he said. "You've had a long few days, but if you need anything at all, I'm usually at the marshal's office on Main Street." "I'll remember that," Jolene said. She watched him walk away, his long stride eating up the distance, and felt an odd pang of loss. Which was ridiculous, she told herself firmly. She had just met the man, and yet she could not deny the connection she felt, the way her heart had lifted when he smiled at her. Mrs. Chen was waiting when Jolene entered the boarding house, her expression knowing. "That one is good man," she said without preamble. "Hard to find these days." "I just met him," Jolene protested weakly. "Sometimes that is all it takes," Mrs. Chen said with a small smile. "Come, I show you room and explain duties." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. A window looked out over the street, and Jolene could see the ocean in the distance, glittering in the fading light. It was more than she had hoped for. Mrs. Chen explained that Jolene would help with cooking, cleaning, and serving meals to the boarders, most of whom worked in the mines or at the harbor. In exchange, she would receive room, board, and a small wage. The work would be hard, Mrs. Chen warned, but fair. "I'm not afraid of hard work," Jolene assured her. "Good. You start tomorrow at dawn. We serve breakfast at 6. Mrs. Chen paused at the door. "One more thing. Some men here, they think young woman alone is fair game. You have trouble, you tell me. I have ways of dealing with men who forget manners. Jolene believed her. Despite her small stature, Mrs. Chen radiated a quiet authority that suggested she had dealt with difficult men before and would not hesitate to do so again. After Mrs. Chen left, Jolene sank onto the bed and let out a long breath. The events of the day of the past 4 days crashed over her like a wave. She had done it. She had escaped Texas, escaped the marriage, and found a place for herself in this strange new town. And she had met Tobias, who made her feel things she had never felt before. She opened her canvas bag and pulled out her mother's letter, unfolding the worn paper carefully. The ink had faded, but she knew the words by heart. Dearest Jolene, if you are reading this, I am gone, but I need you to know something. You are stronger than you think, braver than you know, and you deserve a life filled with love and choice. Never let anyone make you smaller than you are. Follow your heart, wherever it leads. With all my love, Mother. Jolene pressed the letter to her chest, feeling tears slide down her cheeks. I did it, Mama, she whispered. I followed my heart and it led me here. She slept deeply that night, too exhausted even to dream. Mrs. Chen woke her before dawn with a brisk knock, and Jolene dressed quickly in one of the simple dresses Mrs. Chen had provided. Her own clothes, dusty and torn from the journey, would need washing. The kitchen was already warm from the stove, and Mrs. Chen set Jolene to work making biscuits while she fried eggs and bacon. The boarders began arriving at 6 sharp, a steady stream of men who nodded politely and dug into their food with the single-minded focus of those who worked hard physical labor. Jolene kept her head down and worked efficiently, refilling coffee cups and clearing plates. She was just beginning to relax when a rough-looking miner reached out and grabbed her wrist as she passed. "What's your name, pretty thing?" he asked, his breath reeking of whiskey despite the early hour. "Let go of me," Jolene said firmly, trying to pull away. The miner's grip tightened. "I asked you a question. It's rude not to answer." Before Jolene could respond, Mrs. Chen appeared at her elbow with a cast-iron skillet in hand. She said something sharp and rapid in Cantonese, and the miner's face went pale. He released Jolene's wrist immediately. "I meant no harm, Mrs. Chen," he stammered. "You touch my girls without permission again, you find new place to live," Mrs. Chen said, her English suddenly perfect and cold. "You understand?" "Yes, madam," the miner muttered, suddenly very interested in his eggs. Mrs. Chen turned to Jolene. "You are all right," Jolene nodded, rubbing her wrist. "Thank you. Men are simple creatures," Mrs. Chen said, loud enough for the entire dining room to hear. "They behave when you show them consequences. Remember this." The rest of breakfast passed without incident, and Jolene learned the rhythms of the boarding house. After the morning meal, she helped Mrs. Chen clean the rooms and change linens. The work was indeed hard, but Jolene found satisfaction in it. This was work she chose, in a place she had chosen, and that made all the difference. In the afternoon, Mrs. Chen sent her to the general store with a list of supplies. Jolene walked down Main Street, taking in the sights and sounds of San Pedro. It was so different from Amarillo, with its salt air and diverse population. She saw Chinese laborers, Mexican vaqueros, black freedmen, and white settlers, all going about their business in a town that seemed more concerned with commerce than with rigid social hierarchies. She was examining a bolt of cloth in the general store when a familiar voice said, "Miss Reed. I'm glad to see you looking well." Jolene turned to find Tobias standing behind her, his hat in his hands. Her heart did that odd skipping thing again. "Marshall Lawson," she said, feeling suddenly shy. "I'm doing well, thank you. Mrs. Chen has been very kind. I'm glad to hear it." He hesitated, then said, I wanted to make sure you were settling in all right, and to invite you to dinner this Sunday if you're free. There's a restaurant on the wharf that makes excellent fish." Jolene felt her cheeks warm. Was he asking to court her? The thought made her nervous and excited in equal measure. "I'd like that," she said. "I'll have to check with Mrs. Chen about my schedule, but I believe I have Sunday evenings free." Tobias's face broke into a genuine smile, and Jolene realized it was the first time she had seen him truly smile. It transformed his features, making him look younger and less guarded. "Sunday at 6, then. I'll come by the boarding house to collect you." He tipped his hat and left, and Jolene stood there clutching Mrs. Chen's shopping list, her heart singing. The days until Sunday seemed to crawl by. Jolene threw herself into her work, learning the preferences of the regular boarders and the best ways to help Mrs. Chen. She discovered that the older woman had come to California during the gold rush with her husband, one of the few Chinese couples to make the journey together. They had worked hard and saved their money, eventually opening the boarding house. Mrs. Chen spoke of her late husband with a mixture of sadness and pride that made Jolene's heart ache. On Saturday evening, Mrs. Chen called Jolene into her private sitting room. "You have dinner with Marshall tomorrow," she said. It was not a question. "Yes, madam," Jolene said. "If that's all right, I can work extra hours next week to make up for it." Mrs. Chen waved her hand dismissively. "You work hard. You deserve evening off." "But I must say something to you, woman to woman." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Marshall Lawson is a good man, but his work is dangerous. He faces bad men, violent men. You must decide if you can live with this worry." Jolene had not thought of that, too caught up in the giddy excitement of Tobias's attention. But Mrs. Chen was right. A marshal's life was full of danger. She thought of the train robbery, the casual violence of the bandits, and how easily Tobias could have been killed. "I understand," she said slowly, "but I think the worry would be worth it if it meant being with someone who sees me as an equal." Mrs. Chen nodded approvingly. "This is wisdom. Many women choose safety over happiness. Sometimes happiness is worth the risk." She stood and went to a chest in the corner, pulling out a dress of deep blue cotton. "You wear this tomorrow. It belonged to my daughter." Jolene's eyes widened. "Mrs. Chen, I couldn't. It's too much." "My daughter Marian moved to Sacramento," Mrs. Chen said. "She does not need old dress, and you need something nice for dinner with handsome Marshall. You take it. Consider it part of your wages." The dress fit Jolene perfectly, and when she looked at herself in the small mirror in her room on Sunday evening, she barely recognized the dusty, desperate girl who had hidden between crates less than a week ago. Her hair was clean and pinned up neatly, her face was flushed with excitement, and the blue dress brought out the color of her eyes. Tobias arrived promptly at 6, wearing clean trousers and a pressed shirt, his dark hair still damp from washing. The look on his face when he saw Jolene made all her nervous preparation worthwhile. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you," Jolene replied, feeling suddenly shy. "You clean up nicely yourself." They walked to the wharf together in the golden light of evening, talking easily about their week. Tobias told her about his work, tracking down a gang of rustlers who had been stealing cattle from the ranches east of town. Jolene told him about the boarding house, about Mrs. Chen's no-nonsense wisdom, and the colorful cast of characters who rented rooms. The restaurant was a simple place with rough wooden tables and a view of the harbor. They ate grilled fish and potatoes while watching the ships rock gently at anchor, their masts silhouetted against the darkening sky. "Tell me about yourself," Jolene said. "I've told you my whole sad story, but I know hardly anything about you." Tobias leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "There's not much to tell. I was born in Missouri, youngest of 4 boys. My father was a farmer, good man but hard. When the war came, my 3 older brothers enlisted for the Union. 2 of them didn't come home. I'm sorry, Jolene said softly. Tobias nodded. It was a long time ago, but thank you. After the war, my surviving brother took over the farm. I didn't want that life, so I headed west, worked as a cowboy for a few years on ranches in Colorado and Wyoming. Eventually drifted into law work, started as a deputy in a small town in Nevada. Turned out I was good at it and I liked the work, liked helping people. Made my way to Marshall about 3 years ago. You like San Pedro? Jolene asked. I do, Tobias said. It's rough, but it's honest about what it is, and the people here, they're building something. That feels worthwhile. He paused, then said, What about you? What do you want, now that you're free to choose? It was a question no one had ever asked Jolene before. She thought about it carefully, wanting to give him an honest answer. I want to matter, she said finally. I want to do work that means something, to be valued for who I am, not who I'm supposed to be. I want to make my own choices and live with the consequences, good or bad. And someday, maybe, I'd like to have a family, but one built on love and respect, not obligation. Tobias was looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Those are good things to want, he said quietly. Important things. What do you want? Jolene asked. I used to think I wanted adventure, Tobias said. But lately, I've been thinking more about having a home, someone to come back to at the end of the day. Someone who understands the work I do and doesn't ask me to be something I'm not. They held each other's gaze across the table, and Jolene felt something shift and settle between them, like a door opening onto a path neither of them had expected to find. Jolene, Tobias said, reaching across the table to take her hand. I know we just met, and I know you might think I'm moving too fast, but I have to say this. From the moment I lifted that crate and saw you lying there, brave and hurt and defiant, something in me recognized something in you. I've never felt this way before, and I don't want to let it slip away without at least trying. Jolene's heart was pounding so hard she was sure Tobias could hear it. I feel it too, she whispered. I didn't think I would ever feel this way about anyone, but there's something about you that makes me want to be braver than I am. You're already the bravest person I know, Tobias said, his thumb stroking gently over her knuckles. I'd like to court you properly if you'll let me. I know you've been through a lot, and I don't want to rush you, but I want you to know my intentions are serious. I'd like that very much, Jolene said, and the smile that spread across Tobias's face made her feel like she could float right off her chair. They stayed at the restaurant until the stars came out, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's stories. Tobias told her about his years as a cowboy, about sleeping under the stars and waking to the smell of coffee on a campfire. Jolene told him about her mother, about the books they had read together and the dreams they had shared. When he finally walked her back to the boarding house, the streets were quiet and the air was cool. They stopped at the door, and Tobias took both of Jolene's hands in his. Thank you for this evening, he said. It was the best I've had in longer than I can remember. For me too, Jolene said. Tobias hesitated, then leaned down and kissed her gently on the forehead. Sleep well, Jolene Reed. She watched him walk away, her hand pressed to her forehead where his lips had touched, and felt like she was living in a dream. Mrs. Chen was waiting in the parlor when Jolene entered, pretending to work on her mending. You have good evening, she asked innocently. The best, Jolene said, unable to keep the smile from her face. Good. Now go to bed. Tomorrow is Monday, and Mondays are busy. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern that felt both strange and wonderful. Jolene worked hard at the boarding house, and Mrs. Chen gradually gave her more responsibility. teaching her how to manage the accounts and deal with difficult boarders. In the evenings and on Sundays, Tobias would come calling, and they would walk or have dinner or simply sit on the porch of the boarding house and talk. Jolene learned that Tobias was a voracious reader, that he had taught himself Latin and Greek during slow winter months, and that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. Tobias learned that Jolene had a gift for numbers, that she could solve complex problems in her head, and that she had a fierce protective streak when it came to people she cared about. They were careful to observe the proprieties, always having a chaperone when they spent time alone, usually Mrs. Chen or one of the more respectable boarders. But even with these restrictions, Jolene felt herself falling deeper in love with each passing day. Tobias was everything she had never dared to hope for. Kind but not weak, strong but not domineering, confident in himself but interested in her opinions. 2 months after their first dinner, Tobias came to the boarding house with a troubled expression. Mrs. Chen let him in and then tactfully disappeared, leaving them alone in the parlor. "What's wrong?" Jolene asked immediately. Tobias ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had learned meant he was worried. "I got word from the Texas Marshal Service. Your father has been making inquiries trying to find you. He's hired a man, a bounty hunter named Silas Beck, to track you down and bring you back." Jolene felt all the blood drain from her face. "But I'm of age. I have the right to choose." "Legally, yes," Tobias said. "But your father is claiming you stole money from him. If Beck can make that charge stick, he can have you arrested and extradited back to Texas." "I didn't steal anything," Jolene said, her voice rising. "The money I have is from selling eggs. It was mine." "I believe you," Tobias said quickly, taking her hands. "But Beck doesn't care about the truth. He cares about the bounty your father is offering, and he has a reputation for being very good at his job." Jolene's mind raced. After everything she had been through, after finding a home and a life in love, was she going to lose it all? "What do I do?" "We fight," Tobias said firmly. "First, we make sure Beck has no legal grounds to take you. I'll send a wire to the Texas authorities, get verification that there are no legitimate charges against you. Second, we make sure you're protected. Beck might try to grab you anyway and sort out the legalities later. I won't let that happen." "Tobias, you can't watch over me every moment," Jolene said, though part of her wanted to let him do exactly that. "No, but I can make sure people know you're under the protection of the law," Tobias said. "And there's something else we could do, something that would make it much harder for your father to make any claim on you." Jolene looked at him questioningly. Tobias took a deep breath. "Marry me. As my wife, you'd be legally under my protection, not your father's." "He'd have no claim on you at all." Jolene's heart leaped and then immediately plummeted. "I won't let you marry me out of obligation," she said firmly. "I won't trap you that way." "Trap me?" Tobias looked stunned. "Jolene, I've been trying to work up the courage to propose for the past 3 weeks. This situation with Beck just forced my hand. I love you. I want to spend my life with you. The fact that marrying you also keeps you safe is just a fortunate benefit." "You love me," Jolene whispered. "Of course I love you," Tobias said, his voice rough with emotion. "How could I not? You're brilliant and brave and kind and stubborn. You make me laugh and you challenge me and you make me want to be better than I am. I've loved you since the moment you hit that bandit with a piece of wood to save a stranger, probably even before that if I'm honest." Tears were streaming down Jolene's face. "I love you too, so much it scares me sometimes." Tobias pulled her into his arms and Jolene buried her face in his chest, breathing in the scent of him, soap and leather and something uniquely Tobias. "Then marry me," he said into her hair. "Not because you have to, but because you want to." Because we love each other and we want to build a life together. Jolene pulled back to look up at him. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Tobias kissed her then, really kissed her, and Jolene felt like her heart might burst from happiness. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Mrs. Chen was standing in the doorway with her arms crossed and a satisfied smile on her face. About time, she said. I told you, 6 months. I am never wrong about these things. They were married 3 days later by the Justice of the Peace, with Mrs. Chen and Doc Morrison as witnesses. Jolene wore the blue dress Mrs. Chen had given her, and Tobias wore his best suit. It was simple and quick, but when Tobias slipped a gold ring on her finger and kissed her as her husband for the first time, Jolene felt like she was floating. They moved into a small house on the edge of town that Tobias had been renting. It was modest, just 3 rooms and a porch, but it was theirs. Mrs. Chen insisted on hosting a wedding dinner at the boarding house, and half the town showed up to celebrate. The miners brought whiskey, the Chinese laborers brought fireworks, and someone produced a fiddle, and there was dancing until late in the night. That night, in their marriage bed, Tobias was gentle and patient, and Jolene discovered that physical love could be something beautiful when it was given freely between equals. Afterward, lying in the circle of his arms, she felt a peace she had never known before. No regrets. Tobias asked softly. None, Jolene said. You? Only that I didn't find you sooner, he replied, kissing the top of her head. 2 weeks after the wedding, Silas Beck arrived in San Pedro. Jolene was at the general store when she saw him, a tall man with cold eyes and a calculating expression. She knew immediately who he was, and fear spiked through her. But she also felt a fierce determination. She was not the same desperate girl who had hidden between crates. She was Jolene Lawson now, and she had a life worth fighting for. She went directly to the marshal's office. Tobias was at his desk, working through a stack of papers, but he looked up immediately when she entered. Beck's here, she said without preamble. Tobias was on his feet in an instant. Where? I saw him at the general store. He was asking questions about me. Tobias strapped on his gun belt with swift, efficient movements. Stay here. Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me or Mrs. Chen. Tobias, wait, Jolene said. We should face him together. Absolutely not, Tobias said firmly. Beck is dangerous and I won't risk you. I'm not a child to be protected, Jolene said, her own temper rising. This is my fight as much as yours. They stared at each other, and Jolene saw the moment Tobias realized she was not going to back down. His expression shifted from protective anger to resigned admiration. You're going to make me gray before my time, he muttered. All right, but you stay behind me, and if I tell you to run, you run. Agreed, Jolene said. They found Beck at the saloon, drinking whiskey and questioning the bartender. He was a big man with scarred knuckles and a gun worn low on his hip. When he saw Tobias, a slow smile spread across his face. Marshal Lawson, he said, I was hoping we'd meet. I hear you married the girl I'm looking for. Jolene Lawson is my wife, Tobias said, his voice cold and level. And she's not going anywhere. Beck's smile widened. Well now, that's a problem. See, I have a contract to bring Jolene Reed back to Texas to face theft charges. Marriage doesn't change that. There are no theft charges, Tobias said. I verified that with the Texas authorities myself. You're working on false pretenses. Beck shrugged. I have paperwork that says otherwise, signed by her father and witnessed by a judge. That's good enough for me. Let me see this paperwork, Tobias demanded. Beck pulled a folded document from his coat and tossed it on the bar. Tobias examined it carefully, and Jolene saw his jaw tighten. This is a civil complaint, not a criminal charge. You have no authority to arrest anyone based on this. Maybe not, Beck said, but I can sure make life difficult for you and your pretty wife if you don't cooperate. Shame if something happened to that nice boarding house where she used to work, or if the town council started questioning whether a marshal who married a fugitive is fit for his position. Tobias's hand moved toward his gun, and the saloon went silent. Jolene stepped forward, placing a hand on Tobias's arm. "Mr. Beck," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "My father wants me back because I represent a business opportunity he's already been paid for. I was promised to a man I didn't choose and I refused. That's not theft. That's freedom." Beck looked at her with something almost like respect. "Brave words, little lady, but bravery doesn't pay my fee." "How much?" Jolene asked. "Jolene, no," Tobias started to say, but she shook her head. "How much is he paying you to bring me back?" she repeated. Beck named a sum that made Jolene's stomach drop. It was more money than she could earn in 5 years. But then she had an idea. "What if I could prove that my father has no legal claim on me?" she asked. "That I'm exactly where I have the right to be." "Jolene's already shown you're operating on false paperwork," Tobias added. "If you try to take her, you'll be guilty of kidnapping. I'll arrest you myself." Beck considered this, his eyes moving between them. "I don't like leaving a job unfinished," he said finally. "Bad for business." "Then go back to Texas and tell my father the truth," Jolene said. "That I'm married, that I'm happy, and that I'm not coming back. Tell him if he wants to pursue this legally, he can do so through the proper channels. But if you try to take me by force, you'll have to go through my husband, and I don't think that will end well for anyone." There was a long, tense moment. Then Beck drained his whiskey and stood. "You've got guts, Mrs. Lawson. I'll give you that. And I don't get paid enough to fight a U.S. Marshal over a civil complaint." He tipped his hat mockingly. "But your father's not going to be happy. If I were you, I'd watch my back." He walked out of the saloon, and Jolene felt her knees go weak with relief. Tobias caught her, steadying her. "That was incredibly dangerous," he said, but there was no anger in his voice, only concern. "It worked, didn't it?" Jolene replied. "This time," Tobias said. "But Beck was right about one thing. Your father's not going to give up easily. We need to be careful." Over the next few weeks, they were careful. Tobias made sure Jolene was never alone when he was working, and Mrs. Chen kept a loaded shotgun behind the counter at the boarding house, just in case. But Beck had apparently taken Jolene's words to heart, because he left San Pedro without further trouble. Then, a month after Beck's visit, a letter arrived from Texas. Jolene opened it with trembling hands while Tobias watched. It was from her father, and the words were curt and cold. "Since you have seen fit to disgrace the family by running away and marrying beneath your station, I hereby disown you. You are no longer my daughter, and you will receive nothing from the estate. I hope your choices bring you the happiness you sought." Jolene read the letter twice, then handed it to Tobias. She waited for the hurt to come, for the grief of being rejected by her only living parent. But all she felt was a strange lightness, as if a weight she had not known she was carrying had been lifted. "Are you all right?" Tobias asked gently. "Yes," Jolene said, and realized she meant it. "He's given me exactly what I wanted, freedom. He can't claim me, can't demand I come back, can't use me as a bargaining chip. I'm finally truly free." Tobias pulled her into his arms. "You've always been free," he said. "From the moment you climbed out that window and onto that freight train, you just had to fight for it." Life in San Pedro settled into a comfortable rhythm. Jolene continued to help Mrs. Chen at the boarding house several days a week, enjoying the work and the company. The rest of her time was spent making their little house into a home, learning to cook the way Tobias liked, and managing the household accounts with the skill that had always come naturally to her. Tobias's work as marshal kept him busy, but he always made time for Jolene. They would walk along the beach in the evenings, watching the sun set over the Pacific, or sit on their porch and read aloud to each other from the books they borrowed from Doc Morrison's surprisingly extensive library. 6 months into their marriage, Jolene realized she was pregnant. The realization came with a mix of joy and terror. She had seen women die in childbirth, including her own mother, who had tried one last time to give her father the son he wanted. But when she told Tobias, his face lit up with such pure happiness that her fear receded. "We're going to have a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Jolene asked. "Happier than I've ever been," Tobias replied. "Scared too, if I'm honest, but mostly happy." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Jolene was sick for the first few months. Mrs. Chen fussed over her like a mother hen, making sure she ate properly and rested enough. Doc Morrison checked on her regularly, pronouncing her healthy and strong. As her belly grew, Jolene found herself thinking about the future in ways she never had before. She wanted her child to grow up in a world where they could make their own choices, where they would be valued for who they were, not what others wanted them to be. She and Tobias talked long into the night about the kind of parents they wanted to be, the values they wanted to pass on. When her time came, it was a cold January night. Mrs. Chen and Doc Morrison attended the birth, with Tobias pacing outside like a caged animal. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Jolene thought she might not survive. But she held onto the memory of riding 4 days hidden between crates, of facing down bandits and bounty hunters, and told herself that if she could survive that, she could survive this. Just after dawn, her son was born. He was small and red and perfect, with a surprisingly loud cry. Doc Morrison placed the baby in her arms, and Jolene felt a love so fierce and immediate it took her breath away. When Tobias came in, his face pale with worry, and saw them both alive and well, he actually wept. He held their son with a gentleness that belied his rough exterior, his large hands cradling the tiny body carefully. "What should we name him?" he asked. Jolene had been thinking about this. "I'd like to name him after your brothers," she said. "The ones who didn't come home from the war, to honor them." Tobias looked at her with such love and gratitude that Jolene felt tears spring to her own eyes. "Samuel," he said. "We'll call him Samuel after my brother Sam." He would have liked that. Baby Samuel was a good baby, content and curious. He had Tobias's gray eyes and Jolene's auburn hair, and both of his parents were utterly besotted. Mrs. Chen declared him the most beautiful baby she had ever seen, and knitted him so many blankets that Jolene had to ask her to stop. Life with a newborn was exhausting but wonderful. Tobias proved to be a devoted father, getting up in the night to walk Samuel when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, and singing off-key lullabies that somehow always soothed the baby to sleep. Jolene watched her husband with their son and felt her heart expand with love. When Samuel was 3 months old, a new family moved to San Pedro, the Richardsons. They had a daughter named Emma who was just a year older than Samuel, and Jolene and Emma's mother, Catherine, became fast friends. It was nice to have another young mother to talk to, someone who understood the particular joys and challenges of raising children. The months turned into years. Samuel grew into a bright, active toddler who followed his father around like a shadow whenever Tobias was home. At 2 years old, he announced that he wanted to be a marshal just like Papa, which made Tobias laugh and Jolene's heart clench with both pride and worry. When Samuel was 3, Jolene became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and she gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, after Tobias's mother. Rose was the opposite of Samuel in temperament, quiet and observant where he was loud and active. She seemed to study the world with serious dark eyes, and Jolene loved her fierce, quiet nature. The little house on the edge of town began to feel crowded, so Tobias, and some of the men from town built an addition, adding 2 bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Jolene planted a garden and they got chickens for eggs. It was a life far different from the one she had been meant to live in Texas, and she was grateful for it every single day. San Pedro itself was changing and growing. More families were moving in, drawn by the silver mines and the opportunities of the growing harbor. A school was established, and Jolene volunteered to help the teacher, Miss Patterson, several days a week. She discovered she loved teaching, especially mathematics, and several of the students showed real aptitude. Tobias had been promoted to senior marshal, overseeing several deputies. He was respected in the community, known for being fair but firm. There were still dangerous moments in his work, times when he would come home late with new bruises or a haunted look in his eyes. But he always came home, and Jolene learned to trust that he would. When Samuel was 5 and Rose was 2, Jolene discovered she was pregnant for a 3rd time. This pregnancy was harder than the first 2, and Doc Morrison, now in his 70s, insisted she rest more. Tobias hired a girl from town to help with the children and the housework, and Mrs. Chen showed up several times a week with food and stern lectures about taking care of herself. This baby, another boy they named Daniel after Tobias's other fallen brother, was born on a hot August day in 1889. He was bigger than the other 2 had been, with a head full of dark hair and a calm disposition. Samuel was fascinated by his baby brother, insisting on helping with everything, while Rose regarded the new addition with mild suspicion, before deciding he was acceptable. Life with 3 children was chaotic and exhausting, and full of a joy Jolene had never imagined. Her days were filled with cooking and cleaning and teaching and soothing hurt feelings and kissing scraped knees. Tobias would come home from work to find his children climbing all over him, demanding stories and attention, and he would gather them all up with a laugh. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Tobias arranged for Mrs. Chen to watch the children and took Jolene back to the restaurant on the wharf where they had their first dinner. They sat at the same table, watching the ships in the harbor, and talked about the past decade. "You ever regret it?" Tobias asked. "Running away, coming here, marrying me?" Jolene looked at her husband, at the silver beginning to show in his dark hair, at the lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun and from laughter. She thought about their children, their home, the life they had built together through hard work and love. "Never," she said. "Not for a single moment. You gave me everything I didn't know I needed." "You did the same for me," Tobias said, taking her hand. "I was just going through the motions before I met you. You made me want to build something lasting, something real." They talked about the future, about their dreams for their children. Samuel wanted to be a marshal like his father, but Tobias was determined that the boy would finish school first, and maybe even go to college back east if he showed the aptitude. Rose, at 7, was already showing signs of her mother's gift with numbers, and had announced she wanted to be a school teacher. Daniel, at just over a year, was too young to have declared any ambitions, but he seemed most content when he was outside, and Tobias thought he might take after his grandfather and be a farmer. "Whatever they want to be, I want them to choose it," Jolene said. "That's the most important thing." "Agreed," Tobias said. "Our children will always have the freedom to choose their own paths." The years continued to pass in a blur of school performances and scraped knees and bedtime stories. Samuel grew tall and serious, showing his father's sense of justice and his mother's quick mind. Rose was indeed brilliant with numbers, helping Jolene keep the household accounts by the time she was 10. Daniel was their surprise, artistic and musical, with a gift for drawing and a love of the natural world. When Samuel was 13, he came home with a black eye and split knuckles. He had gotten into a fight with an older boy who had been bullying one of the Chinese students. Tobias took one look at his son and, instead of scolding him, asked if he had won the fight. "No, sir," Samuel admitted, "but I made him stop calling Tommy names." Tobias nodded. Fighting should always be a last resort. But sometimes, when words don't work and someone needs defending, you do what you have to do. Just remember that with strength comes responsibility. You don't use your fists to settle arguments or prove you're tough. You use them to protect people who can't protect themselves. "Like you," Samuel said. "Like your mother," Tobias corrected. "She's the bravest person I know." Jolene, listening from the kitchen, felt tears prick her eyes. Even after all these years, Tobias could still surprise her with his understanding of what mattered most. Rose, at 11, had already decided she wanted to attend the new teachers' college being established in San Francisco. She was determined and focused, studying late into the night and helping Miss Patterson at the school. Jolene saw so much of herself in her daughter and made sure Rose knew she could be anything she wanted to be. Daniel, at 8, was the peacemaker of the family, always trying to smooth over disagreements between his siblings. He spent hours drawing the birds and plants around San Pedro, filling sketchbooks with detailed illustrations. Doc Morrison, seeing the boy's gift, began teaching him about medicinal plants and the rudiments of medicine. In 1896, when Samuel was 16, Rose was 14, and Daniel was 11, Tobias was offered a position as regional marshal, overseeing law enforcement for a large section of Southern California. It was a significant promotion with better pay, but it would mean more travel and time away from home. He discussed it with Jolene, laying out the pros and cons. "What do you want to do?" Jolene asked. "I want to be here for you and the children," Tobias said, "but I also think I could do good work in this position, help more people." "Then take it," Jolene said. "The children are old enough to understand that important work sometimes means sacrifice. And you've always come home to us before. I trust you always will." Tobias took the position, and while the increased travel was difficult, the family adapted. Samuel stepped up to help more around the house, taking on many of the tasks Tobias usually handled. Rose helped her mother manage the accounts and keep the household running smoothly. Daniel, despite being the youngest, contributed by keeping everyone's spirits up with his art and his gentle humor. Mrs. Chen, now in her 70s and moving more slowly, sold the boarding house and moved into a small house near the Lawsons. She had become like a grandmother to the children, and they adored her. She taught Rose to speak Cantonese and shared her recipes with Jolene, ensuring her culinary traditions would not be lost. In the summer of 1898, when the Spanish-American War broke out, Samuel announced he wanted to enlist. He was 18 and legally old enough to make his own choice, but Jolene felt her heart tear at the thought of her eldest child going to war. Tobias, who had lost 2 brothers to war, had a long, private talk with Samuel. What was said between them, Jolene never knew, but Samuel came out of that conversation with tears on his face and a new understanding in his eyes. He decided to wait, to finish school first, and if he still wanted to serve his country after that, he would have his father's blessing. The war ended before Samuel finished school, and he decided instead to attend the police academy in Los Angeles, following in his father's footsteps after all. Tobias could not have been prouder. Rose, true to her word, enrolled in the teachers' college in San Francisco when she was 17. It was hard to let her go, But Jolene remembered her own desperate flight toward freedom and knew she had to give her daughter the same chance to pursue her dreams. Daniel, showing an unexpected interest in medicine, began formally apprenticing with Doc Morrison, who was now well into his 80s and needed help with his practice. The old doctor declared Daniel a natural healer, with steady hands and a calm manner that put patients at ease. By 1900, Jolene and Tobias found themselves in an empty nest for the first time in 17 years. Samuel was working as a police officer in Los Angeles. Rose was teaching at a school in San Francisco and engaged to a young professor she had met at college. And Daniel was living with Doc Morrison, learning everything the old man could teach him. The house felt too quiet at first, but Jolene and Tobias rediscovered each other in the silence. They took long walks on the beach like they had when they were newlyweds, talked late into the night, and traveled together when Tobias's work allowed. They visited their children regularly, meeting Rose's fiancé and approving of the match, seeing Samuel receive commendations for his work, watching Daniel blossom into a skilled healer. In the spring of 1901, Rose married her professor in a lovely ceremony in San Francisco. Jolene cried watching her daughter take her vows, remembering her own simple wedding and marveling at how much had changed in 20 years. Rose was choosing her own path, marrying for love, and pursuing a career that fulfilled her. It was everything Jolene had dreamed for her. The following year, Samuel met a young woman named Grace who worked as a journalist. She was smart and independent, and when she and Samuel visited San Pedro together, Jolene saw immediately that her son had found his match. They were married 6 months later in a ceremony attended by half the police force and seemingly all of San Pedro. Daniel, always the unexpected one, announced at 19 that he wanted to study medicine formally at a university back east. Doc Morrison, now 90 and still sharp as ever, wrote him glowing letters of recommendation. When Daniel left for medical school, Jolene cried, but they were tears of pride rather than sadness. Tobias retired from his position as regional marshal in 1903, deciding at 52 that he had given enough years to law enforcement. He took a position teaching at the police academy, passing on his knowledge and experience to the next generation. It was less dangerous work, and Jolene was grateful for it. They became grandparents for the first time in 1903 when Rose had a daughter she named Jolene, after her mother. Holding her namesake, Jolene felt the circle of life continuing, the past and future connecting in the warm weight of the baby in her arms. Samuel and Grace had their first child the following year, a son they named Tobias. And Daniel, surprising everyone, fell in love during his second year of medical school with a fellow student, a brilliant young woman named Sarah. They married in 1906 and settled in Boston, where Daniel established a practice focused on helping immigrant families who could not afford expensive doctors. Jolene and Tobias, now in their 50s, found themselves traveling more, visiting their scattered children and growing collection of grandchildren. Each visit was precious, filled with the noise and chaos of young children, and the warm satisfaction of seeing their sons and daughter building happy, purposeful lives. On a warm evening in the summer of 1908, 25 years after Jolene had hidden between crates on a freight train, she and Tobias sat on the porch of their home in San Pedro. The house had been expanded and improved over the years, and the garden Jolene had planted long ago now boasted mature fruit trees and flowering vines. Mrs. Chen had passed away the previous winter at the age of 86, peaceful in her sleep. Her funeral had been attended by hundreds of people whose lives she had touched, And Jolene had spoken about how the older woman had given her a chance when she desperately needed one. Doc Morrison was still alive at 92, still seeing occasional patients, though Daniel had taken over most of the practice during his visits home. The old doctor had declared he would live to 100 and showed every sign of making good on the promise. "Do you ever think about that day on the train?" Tobias asked, his hand finding Jolene's as naturally as breathing. "Sometimes," Jolene said. "I think about how terrified I was, how desperate. I didn't know if I would survive the journey, let alone find a life worth living at the end of it." "You found much more than that," Tobias said. "You found yourself. You became who you were always meant to be." "We found each other," Jolene corrected, "and we built something beautiful together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. 3 of their grandchildren were coming to visit the following week, and Jolene was already planning all the things they would do together. "You know what I'm most proud of?" Tobias asked suddenly. "What?" "That our children are all exactly who they want to be. Samuel protecting people, Rose teaching and raising a family, Daniel healing the sick. They're all doing meaningful work and they're all happy. We gave them the freedom to choose and they chose well." "That's because they learned from the best," Jolene said, leaning her head on Tobias's shoulder. "You showed them what it means to be a good man, someone who stands up for what's right and protects those who need it." "And you showed them what it means to be brave," Tobias replied. "To fight for the life you want, even when the odds are against you." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Jolene thought about the girl she had been, hiding between crates, running toward an uncertain future. She thought about the cowboy who had lifted that crate and seen not a criminal or a problem, but a brave woman worthy of respect and love. She thought about all the years in between, the struggles and triumphs, the ordinary days and the extraordinary moments. "I love you, Tobias Lawson," she said softly. "I have from the very beginning and I will until the very end." "I love you too, Jolene Lawson," Tobias replied. "You're still the bravest person I know." They sat together as the night deepened, 2 people who had found each other against impossible odds and built a life that exceeded their wildest dreams. The journey that had begun with a desperate flight on a freight train had led to a love that had weathered every storm, raised 3 remarkable children, and created a legacy that would continue for generations. In the distance, a train whistle blew, and Jolene smiled, remembering. But this time, she was not running. She was exactly where she belonged, in the arms of the man who had seen her bravery before she had fully recognized it herself, who had loved her for exactly who she was, and who had walked beside her for 25 years of joys and sorrows, victory and challenges. The future stretched ahead, full of grandchildren to spoil and new adventures to share. But for now, in this perfect moment, Jolene was content. She had fought for her freedom and found love. She had built a home and raised a family. She had lived a life of her own choosing, on her own terms, and it had been more than she had ever dared to dream. The girl who had hidden between crates was gone, transformed into a woman who knew her own strength, who had learned that true courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. And the cowboy who had called her braver than any man had proven himself worthy of that brave woman every single day since. As they finally rose to go inside, Tobias paused at the door and looked back at Jolene. "You know, I never did properly thank you for hitting that bandit with a piece of wood." Jolene laughed, the sound as bright and genuine as it had been on their first dinner together. "Consider us even. You did lift a very heavy crate." "Fair enough," Tobias said with a grin, and they went inside together, closing the door on the past and stepping forward into whatever the future held, hand in hand, heart to heart, just as they had been for 25 years. The years continued to be kind to them. By 1915, they had 9 grandchildren, with more on the way. Samuel had risen to become a captain in the Los Angeles Police Department and was known for his innovative approaches to community policing. Rose had become the principal of her school and was advocating for better educational opportunities for girls. Daniel had opened a second medical practice in San Pedro, making regular trips between Boston and California, and was being considered for a position at Harvard Medical School. Tobias, now in his 60s, had published a book about law enforcement in the Old West that was being used as a textbook in police academies across the country. He still taught occasionally, though he had officially retired, and was known for his engaging stories and practical wisdom. Jolene, at 61, had become involved in the women's suffrage movement, working alongside other women to secure voting rights. It seemed fitting, she thought, that having fought so hard for her own freedom, she would fight for the freedom of all women. She gave speeches about her journey, about hiding between crates to escape a forced marriage, and about the importance of women having control over their own lives and futures. When the 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920, giving women the right to vote, Jolene was 70 years old. She cast her first ballot with tears of joy streaming down her face, Tobias standing proudly beside her. She thought about her mother, who had never lived to see this day, and about all the women who had fought and suffered to make this moment possible. That evening, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, Jolene stood to make a toast. "To freedom," she said, raising her glass. "To the courage to fight for it, the wisdom to cherish it, and the strength to share it with others, and to love, which makes all the fighting worthwhile." "To freedom and love," everyone echoed, and Jolene caught Tobias's eye across the table. He smiled at her, that same smile that had made her heart skip all those years ago, and she knew that whatever time they had left, they would face it together. They lived well into their 80s, surrounded by a family that had grown to include great-grandchildren. Tobias's health began to fail first, his strong body finally succumbing to the years of hard living. He died peacefully in 1930 at the age of 79 in their bed with Jolene holding his hand. "Thank you," she whispered to him as he drew his last breath, "for seeing me, for loving me, for everything." Jolene lived another 2 years without him, staying in their home, tending her garden, and welcoming the constant stream of family who came to visit. She told her grandchildren and great-grandchildren the story of how she and their grandfather had met, about the freight train and the crates and the moment when he had called her braver than any man. "Was he right?" one of her great-granddaughters asked. "Were you braver than any man?" Jolene thought about this carefully. "I don't know if I was braver than anyone else," she said finally. "But I know I was brave enough to run when I needed to, brave enough to accept help when it was offered, brave enough to love fully and completely, and that was all I needed to be." She died in her sleep in the spring of 1932, at the age of 81, with Rose and Daniel at her bedside. Samuel had passed away the year before from a heart attack, and while Jolene had grieved for her firstborn, she had found comfort in knowing he had lived a full and meaningful life. At her funeral, attended by more than 300 people, Daniel stood to speak about his mother. "My mother taught us many things," he said, his voice steady despite his grief. "She taught us that courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. She taught us that freedom is worth fighting for. She taught us that love, true love, is built on respect and partnership and equality. But most of all, she taught us that we always have a choice in how we live our lives, and that the bravest choice is to live authentically, to be fully ourselves, no matter what others expect or demand." He paused, looking out at the assembled crowd. My father used to say that my mother was braver than any man he knew, and he was right. Not because she was strong or tough or fearless, though she was all those things, but because she refused to let fear dictate her life. She climbed onto a freight train heading into the unknown because the known was intolerable. She built a life from nothing because she refused to accept the life others had planned for her. And she loved with her whole heart because she understood that the risk of pain is always worth the possibility of joy. Rose added her own tribute, speaking of her mother's fierce intelligence and her determination that her daughter should have every opportunity to pursue her dreams. She could have limited me, told me that being a wife and mother should be enough, Rose said. But she never did. She encouraged me to reach for more, to use my mind to make my mark on the world. Because of her, I became a teacher and an administrator. Because of her, I fought for other girls to have the same chances I had. Her legacy is not just our family, but the hundreds of students whose lives we touched, the women who gained the right to vote, the people who learned that they don't have to accept the lives others choose for them. They buried Jolene next to Tobias in the San Pedro cemetery, under an oak tree with a view of the ocean. The headstone reads simply, Jolene Reed Lawson, 1862-1932. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. She was braver than she knew, loved more than she realized, and changed the world by refusing to accept the one she was given. Her legacy lived on through her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Samuel's son became a civil rights attorney, fighting for justice for marginalized communities. Rose's daughter became the first woman elected to the California state legislature. Daniel's children all went into medicine, carrying on their father's commitment to serving those who needed it most. And in each generation, the story was told of the woman who had hidden between crates on a freight train, who had been brave enough to run toward freedom, and who had found love with a cowboy who saw her for exactly who she was. It became a family legend, a reminder that courage and love can overcome any obstacle, and that the choices we make echo through generations. The little house in San Pedro, expanded and improved over the years, remained in the family for decades, a tangible reminder of the life Jolene and Tobias had built together. And every year, on the anniversary of their wedding, the family would gather there to celebrate not just a marriage, but a love story that had defied expectations, overcome obstacles, and created a legacy of courage, compassion, and choice. Because in the end, that was what Jolene's journey had been about: choice. The choice to run, the choice to accept help, the choice to love, the choice to fight for her freedom and the freedom of others. The choice to build a life on her own terms, with a man who respected and cherished her exactly as she was. And those choices, made by a desperate 21-year-old woman hiding between crates on a freight train in 1883, had rippled outward through time, touching lives and changing the world in ways she could never have imagined but would have been proud to see. The story of Jolene and Tobias Lawson became more than just family history. It became a testament to the power of courage, the importance of freedom, and the transformative nature of love freely given and gratefully received. It was a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is step into the unknown, and that sometimes, if you're very lucky, the unknown will give you back more than you ever dared to dream.